Welcome to another week of Real Talk Food Safety with Tia and Jill.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're excited to be here. It's
And we
fun.
are so happy to have you here with us.
Yes, yes. This is one of my favorite times.
It is.
Talking about what's going on in food safety, what's top of mind.
And having people here joining in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
We always love to know, like, this is kind of the standard thing now, right? When you jump on like a webinar or a live thing, right? Like, where are you joining us from?
Yes,
Like, let us know you're here. That's always so much more fun.
it is. It
And
is.
of course, like, be part of the conversation. We love to know, especially as we're talking about, let's see, what did we actually title this one? I have to look. In over their head when a team member isn't ready.
Yes, yes. And I'm sure we've all felt that way, right? Like, let us know. Have you felt that way? You're in over your head, or you have a team member that is in over their head.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we're not talking about like why it's happening right now or anything like that. Just have you felt that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah, because I agree, Tia. Like, I have been there, I have felt that.
Mm, mm. Yeah.
And
Tell
part of
me.
why we're talking about it is because, well, so like right when I was in sales for a little bit and got to like meet all kinds of people in all different companies in all different parts of the country, one of the things that always struck me is how many people I would run into that were feeling the load, a whole
Mm,
bunch of them in over their head.
yeah. Yeah.
They either didn't know it or they did know it, but they didn't know how to get help.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. It's like seeing people, especially it's interesting seeing people that's in it and they don't know it, right? And you're like, man, but they feel the symptoms, right? Like
Yeah.
they feel they're burnt out, or they feel overworked, or they're tired, exhausted, right? Don't feel like they have support, all of those things. Or the person that's feeling those things and they're like, yeah, I'm in over my head, right? And maybe I've bitten off more than I can chew.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we've been there.
We've been there.
So that's what we're going to talk about today.
And I think it's relevant. It's relevant to the work that we do at Catalyst, right? Like, so if you haven't joined us before and you're new to us, I'm Tia. This is Jill, and we are co-founders of Catalyst. And our mission is to transform the way people lead in food.
Mm-hmm.
And this topic is so important. Ryan, we see you. Yep, you've been there. Yep, in over your head. This is so important to us, and it's a huge piece of our mission and our purpose, because if we can change the way that we lead and get people ready for leadership, then less people will feel like they're in over their head as they move to different roles within the organization or to other new organizations. We hope to help in this area, right? That more and more people are able to step into a role with confidence, being able to ask for the resources that they need, be able to influence, right? And build the necessary relationships. So I kind of see it, Jill, as like, if we can continue pushing towards our mission of transforming the way people lead in food, that less people will feel like they're in over their head as they take on new roles.
Yeah. And I'd love Ryan and whoever else is out there. Like, what does it feel like when
Yeah.
you are in over your head?
Mm.
I'd
Mm.
love to know because everybody experiences it a little bit differently. And I know, Tia, as we were even talking about this as a topic, not only is it about us, but it's like sometimes we come into a role, like you
Mhm.
said, and we see people around us or maybe our direct reports, and we're like, whoa, like,
Yeah.
how do we help them? Like, they're here. And I think part of it is sometimes we don't know what we don't know.
Mhm.
Part of it is workload. Part
Mhm.
of it is, right, there's just always more.
Mhm. There's always more. Yeah. Sometimes it's mindset too,
Mhm.
where because just being in food safety, like you said, there's always more. There's always risk. And we see a lot of this risk, but we can't take on all the risk at the same time, right? We
Yeah.
just don't have enough arms. We don't have enough hands. We don't have enough people to really take on all of that risk. So sometimes it's even mindset.
It is mindset. Oh, Ryan, what a comment, right? like seeing that we have space to grow, or
Yeah.
that there's spaces that maybe where we thought we knew more and we're like, oh, maybe I don't know as much.
I'm going to take a step back.
Been there too.
Humbling experience a little. Yes.
Well, and we like to think about it. It's when we're in over our head or when we see others in over their head, that means they're not able to do their role the way that we need them to. And there's a whole pile of like well-being things around this as well that we'll talk about. But the other part is, just the analogy that we talked about earlier was like a football team, pick hockey team, baseball team, swim team, pick something, right? Everybody has a role to play.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't fulfill that role, then either things are getting through, you're not winning, you're not getting down the field, somebody else is trying to fill in for you, and then they're out of position. Like that happens all the time at work.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the ebb and flows,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes it's just disruptive.
Yes, yes. I think I love the sports analogy, because we get that on a team, like a sports team, everyone has their piece to play. And if I'm the wide receiver and I'm not doing my role, right, the team feels that, right? The fans feel it, right? Like we feel it. And we're like, Tia, get off the field, right? Like get off the field. You don't know what you're doing. Get off, right? But it's very similar to the teams that we're on today, right? Like if we're not playing our role, doing our part, then the rest of the team feels that. Even if you never hear about it, right? Or you haven't gotten that feedback yet, or, whatever, you haven't had those conversations, the team is feeling it somewhere. The organization is feeling it somewhere. And so it's important that if someone is in over their head, if you are in over your head, right, that we get to a level that you're breathing, right, that your head is above water and you're able to play your part, right, so you can win as a team.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also, we're talking about like this kind of constant state. It's not necessarily like, gosh, I'm just having a bad week.
Right.
Like, oh, I just need to like dig out of this bad week. And then I'm like, I'm flying.
Right.
It's like, it's this core, like, I don't necessarily have the skills to be in this role.
Right.
And I think about often, right? I'll say often, but I've seen this periodically, right? Where maybe there's an open role. I'm going to pick on like food safety quality manager at a plant. Mm-hmm. And they're like, well, gosh, we've had the supervisor here for a long time. They essentially know what to do. Let's just slide them over.
Ooh, yes. Yep.
Right?
We've heard that.
Yes, but we also have seen the same thing maybe happen in different roles at corporate or in different departments and functions where they're like, well, that person essentially knows what's happening. Let's just slide them over. They'll be able to fill in there.
Yes. So
and those are the moments, that I really think, like, how do we pause and go, is this really a good fit? Is this a good slide?
Right. Yeah.
We can do that, but how do we make sure that we're setting them up for success?
Exactly. I think that's the big piece where it's like, yeah, we might need them to slide over, or they might be the best fit right now, but what will it take to make sure that they're successful? What resources do we need to put into place? How do we even assess, right, how well they're going to do in the role in the beginning, right, so that you can get them the necessary resources?
Yes. And hey, Carmen out there, yes, I love this analogy of the QB and the receiver.
Yes.
Right? You can't play multiple roles and still be winning Super Bowls.
Right, exactly.
And get to the division playoffs. Like,
yes.
You just can't be doing that. And companies, funny enough, right? Like we think that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Or we try it and we're willing to do that for whatever reason.
Right. But you know what? I think it's that transparency around, like, if I'm playing quarterback, infield receiver, right? Like, then we need to talk about how both positions are not going to be played well, right? You're not going to get everything you need from the receiver, from the quarterback, because if I'm in the quarterback position right now, then I can't throw it to myself. So if I need to throw it that way, then no one's going to catch it. So if we're okay with that, then we're okay with that, right? If we're okay with not winning the Super Bowl, which, I'm in Baltimore. Baltimore is not necessarily my first team, but I'm here. I've been here for a couple of years. And I am rooting for us to go to the Super Bowl this year. And I will say, like, we need our quarterback and our receivers because, like, I know if someone gets pulled out or someone has to play both roles, like, we're not going to win the Super Bowl. First of all, they're going to be like, timeout. You can't even play this game because you don't have enough players out here. And so we don't think about that in a corporate setting, but it's true, right? Like, we're all teams and we're all trying to go towards a common goal. And if we don't have the right people in place doing the right roles, right, something is going to fall.
Mm-hmm. It will fall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some science. But before I do that, I just want to say good morning over to Damaris.
Good morning.
Glad you could join us today.
Yes.
Right. I think when we talk about like football, right? Like if you see an open spot, you're like, wow, pretty obvious.
Right.
But what are some of the signs that you see? And right, audience, what are the signs that you see? Like,
Yeah.
I think about when I've seen people in that. There's so many questions. So many questions.
Yes. Yes. Questions that you thought that they would know the answer to. Right. As a leader, it's one of those things, maybe those situations where someone moved a supervisor into a manager role because, they've done the work, they understand. And then they get there and you're like, wow, like Tia's asking a lot of the basic questions that I would have thought they would have known. Maybe that's a sign that they're in over their head a little bit.
Right. Like, and those are some of the things where it's, it's more than a question just to gain knowledge.
Correct.
It's, questions about like, how does this even happen? Like you said, it's kind of these assumptions or even, lots of questions around like, oh, I'm supposed to make that decision. Oh, didn't know that. That's supposed to come to our department. It's a new role. Who knew?
Right. Yes. And then, I think it's really great talking about the authority piece because, sometimes when people move into a new role, it's like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that this position made those type of decisions. Okay. And then someone kind of rolls with it, right? Mm-hmm. But if they continue to struggle to make that decision, even though they've been granted the power, right? They have that clarity, they have the expectation, but they are still struggling with that. And maybe that's even around confidence. Then that may be a sign that they're in over their head, that they're not quite ready to even hold that amount of responsibility. And I think that that's a shift, right? And that's a skill to be able to say, okay, I'm now in a position that I can make a decision to throw away $500,000 worth of product. Like, that's a big decision to be in when you were not in that decision place before.
Yes. I think Chelsea, you bring up a good point. Sometimes when we encounter this or people have seen this, it's like we kind of get like, we maybe have a general understanding of how things work, but yet like really understanding how that fits together.
Yes.
And how it fits in the bigger picture. Sometimes it's hard because if you haven't been in those shoes, how do you know?
How do you know?
We have ideas. Mm-hmm. So I think that some of the signs we see then are, some of the things you've probably seen as well, like overwhelmed.
Yes.
Or working really long hours, even after you leave, right? Like the people who are like, well, I'm going to work, and then I'm going to, go home and run some errands, and then I'm going to log back on.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. It's one of those things where it seems like that it feels like they can
never do enough.
Right. They can never do enough. They can never get ahead. They feel like it's always piling on.
Hamster wheel.
Yeah.
Or I think the other side, like I've seen people where they're like totally disengaged. They're like, I don't know, whatever floats to the top and is most important today. Well, we'll see where the fire is.
Yeah. Right. But we've been there where
that's a survival mechanism.
That's exactly, and I'm curious too how the audience feels about this, but like when you're in a position, you're like, man, I have so much to do. I have no idea even where to start. Mm-hmm. And instead of like, making your list and starting at the top, right? You're like, you find that you did nothing today because you had so much to do. You just could not focus on exactly where you need to get done. If that's happening, right, long term, not just a bad week, right? Not just a bad project, but it's happening longer term, then that could be a sign that you're just in way over your head. You have too much trying to flow into your brain that you can't seem to get engaged in anything.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
And if that happens, email me the one thing you're going to get done. And then when you're done with that, then email me that it's done.
Yes.
My mom used to do that for me when I was in college, like around exam time. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I have this project due. And then this and this. And she's like, tell me the one thing you're going to work on right now. And then call me back when you're done. And then she would just say, now, what are you going to do next?
Yes.
And at
That's
least for
awesome.
me, it was the thing that got the engine started. So.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I love that.
But I think kind of along with this, right? Sometimes we see people like it's hard to let go when you feel like you're in over your head, but you know you're supposed to be kind of like the one managing, leading. Like you're like pulling everything like this because you want to have control and understand. But it's things are going like you just aren't there yet. And so sometimes it's a hard time letting go or micromanaging.
Yeah. And that impacts everyone, right? Especially the micromanaging, you won't let the person who stepped into your old role take on responsibilities because you're so attached.
Yeah. And that too, like Elizabeth, like you say, that's like being here is the worst feeling.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, one of the signs is people really aren't enjoying themselves.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're coming to work and they're going through the motions and they you can feel that their passion and commitment to be there, but yet they are just not enjoying it.
Yeah.
And we don't mean every day, right? We've all had those moments you're like, I'm just getting through this. But like there has to be some amount of joy, peace, content.
Yeah.
Fill in the word that is what fuels you.
Yeah.
Needs to be there, or why are you showing up every day?
Yeah, exactly. There should be, when you look at like all parts aren't fun, but it's like, yeah, I have a little fun at work. But when it seems like it's daunting and there is no light at work, there's something going on around the type of work you're doing, right? The role that you have. And it could mean that you're in over your head in the role that you're in.
Yeah, or the people around you. And I think, right, our whole thing is like, how do we bring out people's gifts and talents? And when you're feeling this load on you, like you are not able to share those gifts. You are not able to share the talent. You are not able to like step into your power to like really unleash who you are and the good that you bring to the team, because all these other things are the weights holding you back.
Right. Exactly. And I think that kind of even flows into another sign of just your team is feeling it, right? Your team is giving that feedback, right? Of they're not getting the resources they need. They're not getting the support that they need from their manager, right? They're not, even though their manager seems to be trying, right? Or maybe they're disengaged. The team feels that. And the team is providing that feedback. Or maybe even the team is starting to get a little disengaged because they're managers.
Yeah. And I think, Carmen, you've got a, really good point. We run in lean and mean is what a lot of organizations like to do. And how often are we like, well, we're either cutting roles or we're not filling roles, and we just decide to load things on.
Yeah.
And while that is a challenge, I think there's still some things as either the leader or that you personally, maybe you need to talk with your leader about things. There are still things that we can do. We have choices in that on what that looks like to be able to help manage our workload.
Yeah.
Like we talked to somebody a couple of weeks ago and we were like, you run what size a team with how many people? Right. We were massively like, I was a little nervous for this person. And we're like, how do you do that? But yet show up calm. And she's like, I tell them all the things that are not getting done.
Yeah.
When you're in over your head at some point, you may have to be like, there are going to be things not getting done until this happens.
Yes. So you talked about, right, there are some things that we can do, right? There's some things that you can do as a leader that can kind of help you assess or even figure out like what's going on and how to move forward. So where would we start?
That I think that's always the thing. Like, where do you stop? Where do you start?
Mhm.
And as a leader or as an individual, like our job is to be successful.
Mhm.
Our job is to help other people have success. So I think first it's really pausing and looking at that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, I would start with, just talking to someone, like ask them, like, how are you feeling?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's not a blame thing. It's just assessing. Because for them, they may be like, this is normal. This is how I love it. This is like how I jam.
Yeah.
But to us, it may appear over your head.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we first want to get on the same page, like where is someone, and really ask some questions, open-ended questions to find out, like how are
Mhm.
you feeling in this space?
Yeah, I think the key is those open-ended questions because we're getting right these signs of, man, this person could be in over their head.
Mhm.
But they might have a different perspective around it. It might be something else. So starting with how do you feel about your new role?
Mhm. And I think it's okay to also share what you notice.
Mhm. Mhm.
I remember being in a job where I was overwhelmed and I was working with a coach and they were like, how you feeling? I'm like, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Mhm.
That's how
Right.
I was. That was my go-to. And they were like, but I notice that this is coming up for you. Or
Mhm.
this is how I think Damaris, like you have like body language, like you look tense. And I really actually needed somebody to help me notice that because I was so busy being busy that I didn't even pause to recognize I had signs all over me.
Mhm. Mhm.
I was just blowing through them.
I think that you're bringing up a point on like as allowing someone right to share, but also making sure that you have also spent time observing,
Mhm.
right? So that you can notice these things and have those conversations, right? So like you said, like asking your team member, how are you feeling? And
Mhm.
it's like, oh, I feel great about the role. Tell me more, right? Tell me more about it. This is what I'm noticing.
Yeah.
You know, am I picking up, am I picking up the right vibes? Is that what's happening? Tell me more about that. Being able to dive a little bit deeper and being able to mention the things that you notice is because you spent that time, right, observing and trying to understand from your own perspective so you can dive deeper. Because sometimes, right, like when you come in and maybe you have some one-on-one times, like everyone has an agenda, right? So maybe it's like, I'm fine, I have some things that I need to cover. But if you want to dig a little deeper, right, really
Mhm.
bringing up those things of like, this is what I'm noticing, tell me more about that, then hopefully that will get more out of, are they in over their head?
And I think that's important because once again, Damaris, you have about body language. Like if in my situation, right? Like I was just going through the motions. I didn't even register how tense I was.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine when I would come into a space how that energy felt.
Yeah.
And I think that having once again, when I worked with my coach, that was part of the awareness of going, how are you actually showing up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because even if I'm thinking I'm just rocking it at work and I'm just getting through all the things, I also have to consider like how am I or how are my people, that
Mm-hmm.
my team, how are they showing up for others? Because
Yeah.
once again, we kind of all represent each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Mm-hmm.
somebody feels like they are stressed and overwhelmed and worn out or whatever those terms are, like other people are going to see that.
Yeah.
And that has impact as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that those are big things, right? Like having someone, really assessing how they are feeling about the situation, and then you assessing, right, and noticing that piece. But it's also important as a leader for you to assess like what core competencies and skills do they have, right? And which ones do you need them to build?
Hmm. And that's a great example of where even though things like analytical thinking and critical thinking are really important skills in our field, what about self awareness?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
What about empathy with others and
Mhm.
compassion?
Yes. Carmen had mentioned like not always the best employee is a manager. those are different skills. Like as you move and become, more into a leadership, more strategic role, those are different competencies.
Mhm.
And many times, right? Like many times we are promoted because of our technical strength. And as you move up in leadership, really those technical strengths, it's awesome to have and to build upon, but it becomes even more important to have those leadership competencies, right?
Yes.
To be able to have those people skills, right? Like exactly what you're saying, being able to be compassionate, being able to notice things and build relationships and safe spaces so that when you ask the question of how do you feel, know how do you really feel
Mhm.
about the situation, that people feel comfortable talking to you about those situations. Those all take different core competencies and skills that if you're not assessing those things, it's hard to understand what is needed for the role. But then when someone's in the role and they don't have them, to say,
Mhm.
okay, we need to work a little bit on influence, because not being able to influence is causing you to not be able to delegate,
Mhm.
you not to be able to get your tasks done, and therefore leading to the things piling up and therefore being in over your head.
Yeah.
That's an example.
Yeah, and I think, even to kind of tag on to that, right? We're all familiar with audits, right? We
Mhm.
look for gaps on where things are.
Yeah.
And essentially, we need to do the same with people to go, okay, if they're in over their head, what are the things that they're doing well? Where are the gaps that we have?
Yeah.
And so that's why, like, once again, in boot camp, here
Mhm.
is my shameless plug for boot camp coming up in 2 weeks. That's why we start with expectations and workload capacity and writing out what are you actually doing?
Yeah.
Because there's often gaps in what people think they should be doing versus what they're doing versus what a
Mhm.
leader thinks they're doing versus others.
Yes.
And for us to even understand where you're at, we have to do this initial gap assessment to say, like, where is it?
Mhm.
What does that
Mhm.
look like?
Yeah. I'm curious, Ryan, that was one of the things that you mentioned that you kind of figured out that you weren't as good as you thought you were. Right? So like even as you're in this position of, man, I'm in over my head, I'm curious, like, how did you start thinking about, like, man, so there's some things that I don't know. What do I not know? And what do I need to go get? Right? Like, what skills do I need to get? What knowledge do I need to, get to so that I can be a better leader, a better team player, right?
Mhm.
A better employee.
And this part, takes some work.
It
So
does.
this is the part where when we really are people focused cultures that
Mm-hmm.
we're willing to invest the time to help people navigate through that.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, maybe it's 15 minutes, and other times, maybe it's 15 months.
Yeah.
There's going to be different, right? No one situation is the same,
Yeah.
but understanding where people are at is the most important part and not making assumptions. So,
Yeah.
for example, right, we had a client who they moved from like a food safety quality manager up to a director, and they were like, well, you already investigate customer complaints, so doing this part in as a director with like filling them in and doing this other reporting, like you already know how to do that.
Yeah.
No,
It's easy.
they're like, no, I don't.
Right.
Like, yes, I am familiar with our customer complaint system and I played this part, but now you're asking me to do another part that I
Right.
know actually nothing about, but you're assuming I do.
Right. Exactly.
We do
Yeah.
that a
That's
lot with
big.
people. We do
That's
that a lot.
We do. We assume that people just understand without, right, without being clear, right?
Yeah.
Without being clear about those expectations.
So it's not just having the workload capacity and like the list of here's what I do. That is important. That is step one.
Mm-hmm.
Here I'm like just shamelessly plugging our stuff, but
Oh
that's why
no.
as a strategic leader, that is all about assessment
Mm-hmm.
and the
Yes.
ways that you do it, the way that others do it, the way it comes together, because
Mm-hmm.
that's step two. Like I
Yeah.
know what I do, and then this next part is like, well, are we on the same page of how well
Mhm.
I'm doing it at a much more granular level than an annual appraisal or your quarterly touch base
Right.
or
Exactly.
even a one-on-one, to be
Mhm.
honest.
And it's important. It's important to do that because we're preventing exactly this,
Mhm.
right? Like as you move into our strategic leader, you're learning how do you really assess where you are, where your team is, and where do you need to go.
Mhm.
So that as you move people, promote people, right? Or even hire people, you know what skills to look for. And it doesn't mean that everyone's going to have all 10 skills, right? But at least you know, okay, they have these 7, and
Mhm.
these are the 3 that we need to work on while they're in role. And that's completely okay. But everyone's on the same page so that people don't feel like they're overwhelmed because they don't have these 3 skills. It's like, no, we are all aligned, and this is how we're going to get those 3 skills over the time you're in this role.
Yeah. Which really kind of goes into the next one. Like, how do you determine what options to do? Because, like we just said, some gaps are going to be bigger, some are more critical, some are easier to close. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
like, what have you tried? Curious for the group. Like, what have you tried? What have you seen successful? What have you seen tank when
Yeah.
it comes to helping people with that next spot of like, how do I close the gap?
Yes. Yes. I think it's important to explore that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because like as you assess and now you have these gaps, right? Like you do have options, right? There are options out there to put together, and you might need to ask for help, right? But before you ask for help, what options may you have, right? Like options around resources, right? Do you need more resources?
Yes. Because one that I can tell you for sure that I have never seen work is they just need a little more time in the role and they'll get that figured out.
Oh yeah. Yes.
I
That
don't know about you, but if I was putting an emoji in, that would be like the face.
or you
Because
know what? It might work, right? It might work that they're enrolled, but
that's
it's not going to
true.
work that they're enrolled and you give them no resources.
Yes.
It's not just, oh, just be enrolled. Okay. Well, the longer in the role, absolutely. What resources are you going to give them while they're enrolled, right? To be able to move forward. A lot of times we see that, oh, they're going to be enrolled, but we're not going to provide them with any additional resources.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's the part. What does that look like? Having more resources. Is it
Mm-hmm.
somebody on your team? Is it someone outside your team? Is it temporary? There are so many ways to partner these days
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
that are cost effective and supportive for organizations. So when I hear people say, well, we just don't have the resources, then I wonder, how do we help to be able to influence or give more information around that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I think it's also around knowing, okay, these are the resources that I need. But if they say, okay, well, we don't have the resources. Well, then this is the outcome, right? If I'm playing
Yeah.
quarterback and receiver, right, this is what the outcome is going to be for our team and for our organization. And I think that's really tying it to those business needs, right? Really tying it to how is this impacting our business goals? How is it impacting, maybe our metrics or our overall strategy or even the direction the organization wants to move to, right? How
Yeah.
is that? How is it going to impact each of those things?
Yeah. And I think oftentimes as leaders, we do have an affinity that we want people to be successful. It's just often our plates are so loaded as well that we don't necessarily have the ability to carve out time
Mm-hmm.
to do more training, to do more, for lack of a better word, hand holding, to really be there for people each step of the way, whatever that looks like for that person.
Yeah.
So I think as leaders and as people, we need to really ask the question, like, do I have enough available time to help coach and guide this person?
Mm. Yeah.
And what does that look like so it's successful, not just a periodic, like, well, how's that going for you?
Yes. That's really important, right? Like if you have a team member that's in over their heads, then you have to give them more time, right? Like you have to be able to coach them through, to be able to, like you said, hold their hand sometimes because we know that they're in over their head. So we
Yeah.
need to help them get to where they need to be. And you have to make time for that, right? As the
Mhm.
leader, you have to make time for that. And that means what for you, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what you have to figure out.
It looks different for everyone. I
Mhm.
remember having a manager where even when I would go on site, we'd say, there would be a few things to do. And I'd be like, okay, well, which one should we do right now? And we would walk through it together. and
Mm-hmm.
we would figure that out. But it was making time and being very intentional about what that looks like
Yes.
and giving people options
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
what fits for them.
Yeah. I when I think about someone being in over their head, I remember having a operations lead that was in over their head, and the quality person before them had he had a lot of things on his internal audit list for his line, like a lot of things. And he was really overwhelmed when we talk about the signs, right? He wasn't doing anything because the list was so long for him. And so for me, I needed to get these items completed. So I prioritized them and said, well, let's work on the top 3
Mm.
over this next week. Let's work on the next 3, right? And it's just like your mom asking that question. What is the first thing we're going to do?
Yeah.
After it's done, let's talk about the next thing. After it's done, let's talk about the next thing. And being able for your person, right, being able to help them break it down into pieces if that's what they need, right, in order to move them forward.
And I think that's a big part of even knowing, is this really what the person wants to do?
Yeah.
And understanding, Damari says you have like strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
There's some areas where we're like, that's not the part that I want to do. Like, does it need to, I'm going to even put it out there. Does it need to be part of that role?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's even rethinking how we've created roles to say, like, how does this really fit? And yes, we want some consistency perhaps across our organization on what people do, but how do we get creative to think about what that looks like?
Yeah.
Because if we don't really want to do it, once again, that kind of leads into all the other parts. But
Right.
it's also leading into to our strengths. I think too often we're like, well, that's your weakness. I'm going to have you do it every day.
Yeah.
Blah.
Right. Right.
Like, who wants to face that? Or I really don't like doing that, but I have to do it every day.
Mm-hmm.
How
Yeah.
does that fit for that person?
I think it's also around, in this bucket of determining what your options are, and Damaris, in your example, right, your boss is like, I need your support because I know I'm not going to be effective in this meeting. And so like even understanding your options, if you're the one that's in over your head, right? Like maybe your boss was feeling, I'm in over my head, I'm going to need someone else, right, to really help me engage and connect because that's what's important. Understanding those, just being able to say these are the people that I have on my team that I can lean on for these type of activities, that takes a little bit off the load, right? Because your manager has assessed, right, like who's on his or her team. I don't know if you said his or her, but who's on your team? Who's on your team, right, that can help in these areas, right, that you might not be as strong at. And doing that work ahead of time, right, allows you to be above the surface once those requests come up, once those meetings come up on your calendar. If you haven't done that, right, then that's just one more thing that's layered on that you feel like you need to tackle, even though you're not necessarily the best person to tackle it.
Yeah, which I mean, that's like in a couple of weeks we have a show on DEI, but right, that's a whole other part of like having diverse team members.
Yeah.
And not just in like how, like race, gender, all those things that we normally think of with DEI, but even in diversity of thought and skills.
Yeah.
That's such an important part.
Yes, it's important that you understand what your key skills are, right? Maybe something that everyone needs, but then what does each role really need to be able to have, or each person, right? Like there's some times where, I might be really, really strong at environmental monitoring, right? Say that I need to be promoted, right? Or there's going to be a time because I've been enrolled, right? Like we know I'm going to be promoted in a year. Then that means we need to be thinking about how to either strengthen someone else on the team around environmental monitoring, or the person that's going to backfill me might be strong. And it might not mean that my role is environmental monitoring. That's why I'm strong. Maybe that's something I loved to do, right? And so now I need to figure out how to close that gap. But without assessing, right, which is really was our first step, you're not going to be able to determine what your options are, the second step, so that you can get above water and not feel like you're in over your head.
Yeah. And I think part of that is we think about even like how you close gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Having a very realistic
Yeah.
conversation with your teams and assessment, because we've all seen, right? Maybe there's someone who needs a little bit more support. Well, how is the team around them? So
Yeah.
for example, I remember when we were looking at, let's say, a supervisor that had left, and they're like, well, let's bring in a brand new person. Well,
Mm,
the team there with them, and it was on night shift. They were really like inexperienced. So to have an inexperienced team, they needed a strong supervisor to help them through things. Having an inexperienced supervisor meant then the manager really needed to be committed to spend more time with that team to lift all of them up.
yes.
So I think when we think about closing gaps, right, it's more than just that individual or that
Right.
role. We
Yeah.
really have to assess, once again, it takes a village.
Mm-hmm.
Does the village have time, resources, space to do this? How does
Yes.
that look?
Yes. I feel like the way that we're having this conversation, it's like these things should be happening as we move people around, as we
Mhm,
understand what our talent is. And we know, right, that organizations are behind, specifically in food, number one, but then also just in our technical field. We really don't look at our roles, our teams this way. A lot of times it's really just a C-suite that we're looking at. Okay, how are we going to backfill, our next,
mhm,
chief officer? But we know that without your quality manager, right, or without your key lab techs, things can go very poorly with
mhm.
manufacturing product. And so, we've been talking about it at Catalyst, right? You all know, you've been here with us every Wednesday. We talk about the succession planning because it's important for us to understand each part of our team, right? And understand assessing, right? And what options we have, and then really focusing on closing those gaps. Because that's how we make sure that ourselves, that we don't feel over our heads, and that our team members, right, that they are not in over their heads as they move and shift and take on new responsibilities.
Yeah. Yeah, and as a leader, right, our goal is to have people be successful.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means helping them fully be in that role,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the part of this whole plan. Sometimes it's moving them out of that role.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think those are some of the conversations to that are really beneficial to have, and to
Mm-hmm.
be really practical and forthright on them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, right? There's nothing worse than having somewhere you're like, I don't think I have it in them to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
You don't
Mm-hmm.
have the support system around them to be successful. So,
Mm-hmm.
so how
Yeah.
do you do that? Because leaving someone in a role when you notice and when you've established that they are in over their head and they're not able to fully do that job.
Yeah.
I know sometimes we've heard in food, right? Sometimes, well, at least a body is better than no one. But is it? Is that fair? Is that fair to them? Is that fair to
Right.
you? Is it fair to the team?
So true. So true. I had a manager who was in over her head.
Mm,
And it was very clear. As a matter of fact, it was very clear before I hired in that people felt like this manager was in over their head. And
ooh,
once I got to know them, right, I knew they were in over their head. They knew it, right? And so just the conversation, really allowing them to actually walk through these steps, right? Really assessing like where they are, where do they want to be, right? And then helping them walk through options. They were able to really determine that this is not the best role for them. And from my end, right, I definitely saw it like you just need more experience before you're in this type of role at this type of organization. But even what they were interested in is exactly where they need to be to gain that
mm,
responsibility. And so being able to have that open conversation with them. And the big thing is that we did not have a role for them at the organization. So they knew they needed to transition not just out of the role, but out of the organization. But that felt good to them because being able to understand where they are and what they love to do and where they want to be stretched next kind of gave them this confidence of, okay, I know what type of roles I need to look for next.
Mhm.
And I supported them on that and helping them prepare for their next role, even though it wasn't in the organization that we were in. And so, like, being able to do that, even for yourself or for your team member, was just like, I mean, now she's like thriving. Literally, I talked to her last week. She was traveling for for a new organization, and she is just thriving in the roles that she's had because they're more in tune with the type of work she wants to do, but even more in tune with where she is actually next in where she needs to expand, right? Her knowledge and her experience. And so like that's been fantastic. But doing right those steps of just assessing and having those conversations, right? Of really where are your strengths? Where do you want to work? What are you passionate about? Helped identify, right? Like maybe it is out of this role.
Which can be interesting waters to navigate.
Oh yeah.
Right, depending on where you are with, let's say it is your boss, or maybe there's somebody that's, in a horizontal role from you. There
Mm-hmm.
are things, right? We've talked about like there's the perceived power and authority that's at play with some of these relationships. And so when you see someone in over their head, I mean, the first thing, if I'm in my, I don't want someone to be like, wow, you're in over your head. Like, how do you approach that?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
There's this dynamic, but as humans, right, when we lead with kindness and wanting the best for everyone, like how can we navigate in that space coming from a place of kindness and knowing that everyone deserves to have the impact and feel the value that they bring and to once again share those gifts that they have with people.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you have a point that it's really around having that compassion, right? In that kindness. And I would say it's probably easier with you to a team member, right? Like someone
Mhm.
on your team because you're responsible for their development. And in this particular case, this person was on my team. And so having those conversations, the reason why we ended up having those conversations is that she was marching towards a individual improvement plan, right? And so she knew, right, it was clear that that was the path. And the conversation actually started with her saying that she's going to give her resignation. And because I had been in tune with her, right, I started asking questions. And I started asking questions of, well, let me ask you, do you have a role lined up? And then it became no. Okay. Let me ask you why, you're putting your resignation. And then that's when it became even more clear on, I feel like I'm not doing well in this role. I feel like that I'm failing. I feel like that all the signs, right, that we kind of talked about with being in over their head, that's what they were communicating. And then switching the conversation on what would you like to do? Right? What would you like to do? Would you like to do it here? Would you like to do it somewhere else? And that's where we really found, okay, she really wants to transition out and do a different type of role. And having that compassion for where she was, the compassion for the fact that she was running, right? She wasn't making a decision that made sense for her finances or her situation or the fact that we were going into the holidays, none of this, right? Like she was almost running, but because I showed up to the conversation with this compassion for her situation and where she is, right? Then she was able to be open and honest, and we were able to put together a transition plan that worked for her and the organization, right? With her transitioning out. And so I think you're right. You're right on it. Having that compassion, right? Just kindness, understanding that the person you're talking to is a human being that have that has things going on in and outside of work.
And I think that right when we can lead with that, that moves us far.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think many of us can relate to that in our technical roles, right? Part of our path is to move up, gain more responsibility, get more money, get promoted, is to move up.
Yeah.
Sometimes that doesn't always feel right. I think Carmen, maybe you had a comment that was like, not everybody's a manager, not everybody's a formal title leader.
Yeah.
in that role.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't know that till you get in it.
That's true. That is very true.
And so, even recognizing that, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is a really important part. And sometimes it doesn't mean like, gosh, like you said, that you're going to be able to move out right away. But going after Damaris, where she talked about strengths and weaknesses, how about like when you notice when you're like, gosh, it seems like you don't like putting presentations together. I can do that for you, or I can help you with that, or how can I make it easier for you?
I love
It's
that.
not taking on their work, but it's lending a hand. And then maybe you're like, well, hey, could you do this part for me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or humor. I love humor anywhere, but especially at work, right? Like I had a boss who just as a restructure kind of took on our food safety team. And I was like, wow, you really want to be part of this group? And he's like, yes, but no. We approached it with humor where he's like, I don't know anything. So we're going to have you do this, but here's what I need help with to get there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think just once again, this is all relationship based
Mm-hmm.
and creating those safe spaces.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is when I think about what if the person that's in over their head is your boss or your counterpart and you really have no responsibility for them, like being able to say, like, where can I help? Where can I help if you have that space, right? Even pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, right? Maybe there's some things that you might need to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, hey, let me pick that up so I can gain that skill because I need it in my role, or I know I'm going to need it to get promoted, or whatever it happens to be. It's like, it's some of those things that's still leading with compassion to say, how can I have this, how can I lend this helping hand?
Yes. Without being the quarterback who's now the receiver as well.
Right, exactly.
I'm just learning some of the plays that you might be doing just in case.
Right, exactly. Right, that you can help, right? That you can really help them in their role. And it's funny, like when you talk about a new boss, I even thinking about a new boss coming over, right? And they're not a great fit for your team. Like you already know they're going to be in over your head. How do you be proactive about that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that we did was set up a team meeting, right? And have some conversations about the culture of the team and some of the pushback that we get and how do we deal with that? Like giving some insights into how the team is currently running and what is working well with the team. In this example, we knew this new manager was going to be a disruptor in a bad way to our team, so we really put some time and resources into helping them get on board and really laying the foundation on this is how we do work and this is what works really well with our team. So they'll know, like, you don't have to tinker or fix anything over here, but this is where we need your help, right? And this is where we don't need your help.
Being proactive. And I think that's the whole message with this, right? When you think about people getting into their overhead, all of it's preventable.
It is.
Right? It's all preventable. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it is preventable in terms of putting plans in place and understanding what are the actual work tasks someone's doing, what competencies are needed, what skills, what ability, like evaluating that. I mean, right? It seems like a no-brainer. Like you do that before someone goes in a role.
Yeah.
But we know the reality is that things are moving 100 miles an hour all the time. And sometimes those chess pieces are moving faster than we actually have time to think about, like what will the 3 moves later be?
Right.
So it's still thinking about how can you be more proactive? Because I know we only have a few minutes left. At the end of the day, there are always options. You always have options on whether or not you want to start the conversation, be part of the conversation, like activate for, be an advocate for change, or whether you're like, I'm still here energetically. This is where I'm at and I'm not ready to move.
Yeah. And you have the option to do the opposite, right? To say that, I've asked for the resources. I'm still in and over my head. And that in this particular environment, that's where I'm going to have to operate for at least the foreseeable future. And I don't want to do it. Right. You have that option.
Yes.
You have
I
that option.
think on top of that, though, you are still responsible for your energy and what you put out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and we know, right? It's a mirror. What you put out there is what you get back.
Mm-hmm.
So always thinking about kind of how that plays out for
Yeah.
you, for your team members. Maybe it's the other people that you see, like we talked about. Maybe it's a boss or, someone who's horizontal or vertical from you, however that
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah. I think the thing that just stands out to me is just being proactive. And if you're in the position right now, right, like start thinking about these things and start putting some game plans together, right? Taking a look at yourself and where you are. Like that's exactly what we do in boot camp. And before your people get overwhelmed, right, you want them to make sure that they have these skills. So I'm going to call it out again, Jill. Like our boot camp is starting February 6th. And it is there to prevent you from being in over your head before you get into that manager position, right? While you're in that manager position, right? While you're in that leadership position, it's designed to give you those tools, right? And have you practice those skills so that you can have these conversations, right? So you can move things forward and create safe spaces for your teams.
Yeah.
And then us, like we have our leadership development program. So it just builds from there, right? It builds into that deeper assessment that Jill was talking about. It builds more into how are you looking at your overall team. But it starts with you, right? It starts with you and your mindset and your energy and your mind and how you show up every day. So that, like you said, it's that mirror. It's what are you getting back and how are you setting up your team for success?
Mm-hmm. And I love from our last boot camp when somebody said, an example of how our boot camp is different because of its coaching based principles is they had been through other leadership training, right? Like relationships, like how to build relationships. And they were like, whoa, we've never been through relationships like we had with boot camp. Right? Because we approach it from coaching. It's not just this formulaic approach of how you build a relationship and nurture. It's asking about what you're doing, how you're contributing, how you're being perceived, how you're practicing that. And we go through that with an entire cohort because relationships are not in a vacuum. So neither is leadership development.
No. And it's very relatable and practical to the work that we do. Right? It's the work that we're doing. So how do we build relationship in our field with these technical minds, right? That occupy food safety and quality and our sensory and our engineering, right? And that's a little bit different, right? Than other industries, right? In other spaces. So being able to really connect it to how do I build relationships where I am today has been so impactful to our members.
Yes, it has. So if you haven't checked it out, we'll drop a link in the comments. But I mean, I almost like dare you. Try it. See how it's different. No, seriously, try how it's different or someone on your team. Because, right, if we're looking for something different, we have to be willing to do something different.
That's right. Yeah. Otherwise,
I was saying, and if you're wondering, well, oh, it sounds cool, but like, I don't know how to get the funding or I need support from HR or something like that. Well, guess what? Next week, we have Stephanie Vitrano, who has worked in leadership and development and HR for years, and this is her passion. She is going to give us some tips on how do you partner with HR, because they too want you to continue your development journey. So next week, that's who we'll have on. Same time, same place.
Yes. So we hope to see you next week. We hope to see you on February 6th when we kick off our spring cohort. And until then, reach out to us. Let us know how things are going. If you're in over your head, we're serious. Send us a note and let us know what is your next step.
Yes. What is your next move? Until then, make it a great week. And we appreciate you being here with us today.
Absolutely. See you all next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.